On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, Washington will extend Huawei's reprieve by 90 days. Is this a turning point in the U.S.-China trade war? And India revokes Kashmir's special status in its constitution. Will conflict erupt between India and Pakistan? And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. We begin with a look at Huawei and its tenuous ties with Washington. Huawei was first placed on a so-called entity list, but also known as blacklist, then given a 90-day reprieve that was extended on Monday. Another 46 affiliates of Huawei, though, are being added to the list on top of the original 68. The Chinese tech giant has been caught in the crossfire of China-U.S. trade war. The year-long trade conflict has caused the ripples throughout the global economy. Before we get down to the discussion with our panelists, both from China and the United States, let's take a look at this first.
The fate of telecom giant Huawei's ability to purchase U.S. components has come on Monday, when U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said that America will delay the Huawei ban by another 90 days, and his department had also added 46 more Huawei subsidiaries to the entity list. On Sunday, President Donald Trump said he did not want the country to do any business with Huawei at all.
And actually, it's the opposite. Huawei is a company we may not do business with at all. And it was sort of reported, I think, the opposite today. I was surprised that we are open to doing business. We're actually open not to doing business with them.
The U.S. first moved to block Huawei from buying U.S. parts back in May, claiming the company poses a threat to national security, something the company denies. In 2018, Huawei purchased some $11 billion worth of components from U.S. companies. Huawei's fate has been a part of the ongoing trade war between the world's two largest economies. Now the trade war is occurring amid increasing fears of economic slowdown in the U.S. and around the world, which could lead to a recession. The stock market zigzagged over the past week on fears of a recession.
Another day or another 90 days for Huawei, but any company can endure that kind of unpredictability in business. We're going to ask our panelists from China and the United States. In Boston, we have Roger Antner, founder and lead analyst at Reckon Analytics. Welcome, sir. In Beijing studio, Liu Baocheng, who is the Dean of the Center for International Business Economics from University of International Business and Economics. Meanwhile, we have in our Beijing studio Jay Wang, who is the founding partner of Stone Capital and former managing director of Intel China. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Jay, I want to go to you first. Another 90 days on top of the earlier 90 days, so-called reprieve from the entity list. What does it really mean? Can Huawei breathe a little bit fresh air under the current circumstances?
I think what it really means is, Huawei's and the product and the services and to the United States, especially in the rural area, are quite critical for the farmers, and which are the constituencies for Trump's administration. I think that has some impact for this decision. It also says, and then they gave another extension for 90 days. I think it's also seems to suggest that may have an impact or link towards to the trade war decision.
Interesting. The timeline always, isn't it? When reading the timing of this decision, one probably has to take a look at the U.S.-China relations on the overall basis rather than just Huawei and individual case. Professor Liu, how do you see that?
Well, it's not really doing a favor to Huawei, but rather they are doing a favor for the U.S. suppliers, because Huawei buys $11 billion worth of products. That's a trade, and also that when
from the United States,
suppliers, and when Donald Trump blames China on the trade imbalance created, now he's really refraining those companies to sell to China, so that's a realistic loss on those suppliers, and plus that can really exacerbate the trade imbalance. So that also shows that he is really, using this trade war as a rhetoric rather than really there to serve objective to narrow the trade imbalance.
Mr. Ratner, how do you see that from the American perspective? Is it for mainly Trump politics?
Well, I think we have to look at it from two dimensions. There is American companies selling to Huawei, and that is clearly a trade issue. And the entities list and the down to the wire approval is meant to increase the pressure and unbalance Huawei and the Chinese negotiators who are meeting within the next 10 days with American negotiators. So the timing is also very interesting, that another 90 days brings us to mid-November, which is right about the time when the 25% tariffs are coming in. So it all drives to a culmination here late in the year for either a resolution or a significant deterioration of relations. Then we have American companies buying from Huawei, and here the security concerns are playing a significant role. I don't think that the Americans will budge on that, but that the small rural providers over time will have to switch to a different provider, and there's already a bill in Congress that will pay for that.
Very interesting situation over there. Mr. Antner, just for argument's sake, is there any concrete evidence so far as you know, from Washington or anywhere, providing about so-called national threat Huawei has toward the United States? Any concrete ones so far?
Well, one of the things in the intelligence community that you say the secret of success there is don't tell everything you know.
They know
so
it.
The intelligence community have been quite reserved in what it is. There's one report that out of Africa where the French authorities have been called in to help sweep the African Union building in Addis Ababa, and reportedly found traces of Huawei equipment that communicated back to China. So that's the one concrete evidence that we have for that. Other than that, it's just rumors.
Very interesting. Jay, go ahead.
I think those accusations are groundless for at least 3 reasons I can see. Number one, Snowden disclosed the U.S. intelligence agency has broken into Huawei's and the company's network, tried to find the so-called backdoors, and then they couldn't find anything. This is number one. Number two is in Europe, and Huawei have a lab. It's open lab, and to let everybody check on their equipment. They want even open source their source code. So everybody can take a look at that, whether there is a backdoor. Thirdly, if, say, worst case, you worry about Huawei's equipment has some backdoors, Huawei says, in a telecommunication equipment set, we have a core network which connect to the network, and access which connect to the core network. Huawei says, look, I'm willing to sell only the access network.
I see.
You maintain your core network. So if security really is real concern, you can always buy the U.S. company equipment for your core network, and then buy Huawei's equipment for your access network. They have 0 chance for any backdoors. So I think I gave us 3 reasons. I think those acquisition is groundless, in my opinion.
All right. If it is politics,
yes.
What does that mean? First of all, if we can take a look at a quote coming from Ren Zhengfei, who's the founder of Huawei. Founder and chief executive of Huawei, Ren Zhengfei, recently, when receiving a report from Sky News from the UK, he interpreted the ban from the U.S. From a very positive and certainly humorous angle. Take a look. He said, without the propaganda from President Trump, namely about national security, that's what he's referring to, people in the world wouldn't know the competitiveness of Huawei products, end of quote. And the fact is, the company cannot keep up with the large demand from customers, he also said, as a result of the quote-unquote promotion coming from U.S. President Donald Trump. Of course, that's quite a joke that you want to put there in quite the days of pressure, I guess, Mr. Ren have to face day by day. But Professor Liu, let me go to you about that. 46 entities of Huawei, meaning subsidiaries of Huawei, on top of the original 68 that were already on the entity list by the Commerce Department. What does that mean? Is the United States banning Huawei on a much larger scale?
Yes, so they do not only want to control the trunk, but also they cover the entire, tree leaves and boards. So this is the way they want to do. And initially, it's a matter of mistrust and it's a fear rather than fact that they want to corner Huawei. And then, admittedly, Trump said, okay, he really relates Huawei issue to the trade war, so which now turns out Huawei becomes a victim. I really like, the Mr. Ren's quotation, because he is stoic, by being very disciplined, has a strong drive, but in the meantime he also has a doist genes, by turning the opposite, in a natural and dialectical way. So
positive thinking, I guess he has
yeah.
learned a lot throughout the experience this time, at least. Jay, I want to have your opinion also as well. What does it mean for Huawei when it's operating globally? You see some latest development, if I could just name some of those about Huawei to you for now. One is their quarterly report recently has been quite good. Of course, one could argue whether the impact of trade war has yet to have on its eventual business operations. The other thing is it's been trying to recruit talents from all over the world, coming from offering great salaries for the young talents to also operating research labs about 5G and research labs generally in different parts of the world, including more in Russia, which just opened 3 more in that, like today. It is the latest news. So what do you make of Huawei's way of dealing with all of the latest, which itself cannot control?
I think you look at Huawei's business, you can think about Huawei business in 3 chunks. And one is on the consumer side for phones. That's depending on individual consumers to choose either Huawei's phone versus Xiaomi's phone or Samsung or Apple's phone, for example. That's one side. The other one is selling to the telecommunication operators, and then third is to the enterprises.
Right.
You look at on telecommunication operator side of it, and right now it's consolidated pretty much, and then in the Western world is pretty much Ericsson and Nokia and duopoly. Without Huawei, you can imagine, and then in the Western Europe or even in the United States, and then you have a duopoly situation. There's not much competition. The price will be pretty high without Huawei. So you can see, and Huawei really plays a very important role for the global telecommunication operators. That's one of the reasons, in my opinion, why Huawei's existence is important for this overall landscape and also the overall operators and the business.
Roger, do you think the American companies would like to continue their business operations and cooperations with Huawei? After all, as earlier we mentioned, the $11 billion purchased by Huawei from American companies last year. So what does that mean when it comes to their argument with Washington now? How powerful is it? Does it make sense?
Well, of course, American companies would like to continue doing business with Huawei. $11 billion is almost 10% of the semiconductor exports in a given year. So losing that business would significantly hurt them. For some companies, it's as high as 50%. So a significant, very growing and strong part of the U.S. economy would be hurt by such an embargo. We always would like also to do business with Huawei from a vendor perspective if the security concerns that the American government is raising would be alleviated, and the American companies have to listen to what the government says, especially because you're not allowed to sell to the U.S. Government if you have Huawei equipment in your network, and that's billions of dollars in business. So that's the major consideration here.
Right. I guess those are very important facts that also one needs to take into consideration. Professor Liu, so what does that mean now? If you see a Huawei that is operating on a 90-day reprieve basis, which is funny, right, for any company in the world. And how could a business relationship be stabilized and well-established if that is the case? And how could consumers be able to enjoy the product only knowing my fate of using it for 90 days? So this is putting Huawei into a corner and a very difficult situation, Professor.
Absolutely. Well, this is a relief, and also with a specific timeline. That's
it's like a knife hanging on your head.
That's right, and also with a definite date. So in the meantime, I noticed that Huawei gave very sound assurance to consumers that they're going to take care of them. And the other is that Huawei always says, okay, they have a spar tie. That's quite a deter, actually, to what is going on in the entire supply chain and also Huawei's technological progress. But this deterrence does not mean, complete obstruction of how Huawei can move ahead. So Huawei is now producing a simplified version, and although it doesn't have all the app stores and connectivity with the entire ecosystem.
You're talking about Huawei operating system, Harmony operating system.
Home or Harmony system. So that can really, over a long run, it is important for Huawei to earn time.
Right.
But that can also push them to work more homegrown and self-controlled technologies that is lying ahead.
No secret that Huawei, Jay, is being caught in a geopolitical crossfire between China and the United States. This is not just geopolitics itself, but also a competition in technology and innovation. So Jay, how do you see the fate of Huawei from now on, particularly it as an example of how Chinese and American business communities are likely to face when it comes to geopolitical pressures from both sides? Okay.
I think when we look at this in the 90 days and the extension, I'm looking at the positive side. That gave Huawei another 90 days to build up its inventory.
Right.
Right, for the next year or two to come, right?
Which has been doing before even the trade war.
Yeah, I think the Huawei, look at Ren Zhengfei's multiple interviews. I think he did a great job and to articulate the Huawei's and moving forward. For the operating system, for example, he pretty much says that if you allow me to use an Android, I will continue to use Android to collaborate with Google or and a lot of developers, and then to develop their applications based on Android. However, if you do not allow me to use it, I have to use my own choice, which is Harmony, right? That's the overall and their Huawei's and attitude or their position. Basically, they're still trying to, as much as possible, open up their doors to the global collaboration instead of a closed door to get separate and then like a nationalism standard or whatever. That's not the Huawei's way to go. But unfortunately, if Huawei has to go that path, I think that's a lose-lose for Huawei and also for the global and economy.
Roger, it's no secret either that some would love to see so-called decoupling between China and United States, particularly when it comes to technological development and cooperation, as well as innovation. How do you, from your perspective as a tech person yourself, see the efforts made by some and the business communities so far efforts to fight back and their abilities to fight back after all?
Yeah, a decoupling of the economies and a separation of the research integration would be not good for everybody involved. It would hurt China, it would hurt the United States, it would hurt the rest of the world. I think the shared prosperity that we have enjoyed over the last 70 years since World War II has come from a further integration. It has, we have learned the lessons of Adam Smith about the competitive advantage or comparative advantage of nations, and China has learned, the United States has learned, and we do the right work in the right places. So the steps to decouple the economies is raising prices, it's slowing down research, and should be opposed at any time.
At any time, and yet politicians sometimes think in very different logic compared to others. And unfortunately, some politicians think even in more different logic compared to the others these days. So let me go to you, Professor Liu, about this. We've seen it's not just about China and the United States. It's really about the two largest economies in the world, how they're dealing with one another and what they are making an impact on the rest of the world as well, besides on their own. You see, last week, stock market, bond market globally has been experiencing some turbulences, to say the least. And now also reports about a possibility of recession about the United States. I'm not saying nobody's wishing U.S. to have a recession because the U.S. is the largest economy in the world. It will have a rippling effect on everybody. But just saying from Fitch rating, for example, it's been suggested as well. Now, how do you read all of these signs combined together? What does that mean? Professor Liu, you're an economist. Probably you can help us understand that better.
Well, the politicians, yes, have their own agenda. They, a lot of times their strong ego can really misdirect the economic growth level. And also that politicians can use their position to inflate the nationalism or populism that can really, move the whole nation into a wrong direction. Look at, what happened along the history. That there can be collective blindness and also animosity that is really created. So this on the political front is very dangerous. And of course, immediately the economic pain is being felt by all of the world. And right now, all consumers actually across the globe, not only between China and the United States, already feel the price hikes. And of course, the job opportunities, the quality of jobs are also being jeopardized. And unfortunately, we do not really see that there is the end of this bleeding.
Unfortunately, as the trade negotiation continue, with hopes that it could continue, given the latest interactions between the two sides. But before we go, I do want to invite the two of you, Roger and Jay, help us understand what does it mean for the business community, particularly the tech business community. How can they prepare for winter, shall we say? With the hope still in mind, but what to do now? Roger, your thought.
Well, what the American tech companies can do is influence the U.S. government. For example, last Friday, Tim Cook had dinner with President Trump, and China was at the forefront of that conversation. So it's to influence the American government to find a solution for the for the problem, because business hates nothing more than uncertainty. And there's so much uncertainty in the world right now. We need to find a solution between the Chinese and the American positions so that we have a stable foundation on which both countries can prosper and the companies within.
I see. And Jay?
For the Chinese high-tech startups, which we have invested quite a lot of them, and their short-term solution is one, and if previously they plan to build one factory inside of China, now they're considering they have to build another one outside China to cope with the tariff. Secondly, previously if they had a lab in the United States, now they're worried, and then this one may subject to the sanction by this and the geopolitics, and then, so now they have to thinking about moving that lab from United States to another country, maybe back to China. As you can see, this is not really a help for both countries.
The cost of doing business and certainly research have been going up as a result of all of this for all sides. But for now, I want to thank the three of you, Roger Antner in Boston, Liu Baocheng and Jay Huang in Beijing. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. India revokes Kashmir's special status in its constitution. Will conflict erupt along the India-Pakistan border? We're going to talk about that a bit later. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program coming to you live from Beijing. We now turn to Kashmir, where India and Pakistan exchanged their heavy fire in the region on Saturday. The latest escalation in the long disputed territory started around 2 weeks ago when New Delhi stripped the region of its autonomous status. How will this crisis between the two nuclear-armed neighbors play out eventually? Before we ask our panelists from China, India, and Pakistan, take a look at this first.
Tensions soar in Kashmir. Pakistan said 3 of its soldiers and 5 Indian troops were killed in crossfire last Thursday, one of the deadliest clashes between the rival armies this year. Following the lockdown on August 5th, New Delhi unexpectedly scrapped Article 370 in the Indian Constitution that had granted Kashmir special status. Indian Prime Minister Modi defended the action, saying the old laws were used to breed terrorism, separatism, dynasticism, and large-scale corruption.
Because of this, over the past 3 decades, some 42,000 innocent people have lost their lives. This number can bring tears to anyone's eyes.
Meanwhile, Pakistan suspended all trade between the two countries. Prime Minister Imran Khan accused India of planning further military action in the disputed region.
This action will not stop at Kashmir. Today I'm sending a message to Narendra Modi. You take action and your bricks will be reciprocated with stones.
Islamabad has been calling on the international community to intervene, and the UN Security Council discussed the matter in a closed-door meeting for the first time since 1965. After meeting diplomats from both India and Pakistan in Beijing earlier this month, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that both countries are China's friendly neighbors and the dispute born out of the region's colonial history should be handled in a peaceful way. He also stated that China opposes any unilateral action that complicates the situation. More than 10 million people live in the Kashmir region. The majority are Muslims. Last year, more than 300 militants were killed in Kashmir, and India and Pakistan have fought 2 wars over the land since the 1947 partition.
So how bumpy is the road for India and Pakistan over Kashmir? Let's ask our panelists from the 3 sides. In Islamabad, we have Sultan Ali, who is a defense and security analyst and former Pakistani Air Force captain. Welcome to our program. Meanwhile, we want to welcome in New Delhi, India, Sitrapuyuday Bhaskar, who is the director of the Society for Public Policy And also with us in Beijing, Rong Ying, Vice President of China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Very briefly, from both sides, India and Pakistan, briefly, I mean 30 seconds if you can, sir, from both of you, what do you make of the latest military conflict happened over the weekend? Mr. Bhaskar first.
The situation is slightly tense, and yes, India had lost one soldier on Saturday, and this was what we call as the firing from the other side. The line of control, as we call it, between India and Pakistan has been quote unquote hot for a long time, and yes, it is a situation that needs to be brought under control, and nobody likes to lose lives, particularly of soldiers. So to that extent, it is something that has caused a certain amount of dismay on this side, largely because we feel that the firing that has taken place from across the border by the Pakistani troops is something that is seeking to exploit the situation in Kashmir just now.
Okay, Mr. Hali, to be fair, also same time for you, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, I look at it this way, that you see, you talked about the Indian government's action on the 5th of August of removing the autonomy of Indian occupied Kashmir. But what has happened after that is that the Indian Defense Minister made two very serious statements. One, that India is considering revisiting its first no use of nuclear weapons policy. Number two, he said that no negotiations will take place with Pakistan except for the return of the Azad Jammu Kashmir, which happens to be under Pakistani control currently. Now, both these statements are very provocative, and what happened over the weekend was, I would not like to get into an argument with my Indian counterpart who started it first, but apparently it was a tit-for-tat action, and we certainly hope that restraint is used.
Okay, Mr. Bhaskar, once again, I want to get to your opinion about the 2 points, particularly about two nuclear countries, India, Pakistan. If the more powerful one, namely India,
I do want to clarify this, if I may.
If the more powerful one, namely India,
I just want to clarify one point,
would use nuclear arms when tensions escalate, what would that mean to the rest of the world? Will India be able to hold that responsibility? Go ahead, sir.
I want to clarify this, ma'am, to say that this is not an accurate representation of what the Indian Defense Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, had said. Let me clarify for the benefit of your viewers and for our panelist who's in Pakistan, the retired Air Force officer. What the Defense Minister in India said is that India is committed to no first use. That has been the policy of India since the nuclear tests of May 1998. And there is no change in the Indian doctrine or the Indian position. What he did say is that as far as the future is concerned, much would depend on the circumstances. And the subtext of that, if I may add, is that there has been some anxiety over the last few years, I would say, when Pakistan has spoken about using tactical nuclear weapons in various exigencies that they may feel is important for their national security. I want to say this emphatically. I've spoken to my Chinese colleagues over the last decade on this subject. The nuclear weapon has only one purpose, and that is deterrence, to prevent the use of any other nuclear weapon, not for changing borders. So I hope that clarifies the Indian position as far as the nuclear weapon is concerned.
Thank you, sir. Of course, politicians make statements. Sometimes it's aiming at vagueness so that to have the so-called strategic deterrence. But let me also ask you, Mr. Hali, what about that statement as cited by Mr. Bhaskar from India about so-called tactical use of nuclear weapons from Pakistan?
Well, I believe that Pakistan is a responsible state. It does have nuclear weapons which are purely to be used as a deterrence and not as an offensive weapon unless, of course, we are forced to do that. Now, when Commodore Bhaskar talks about Pakistan developing tactical nuclear weapons, I think he forgot to mention that India launched the strategy of cold start, which means that India will be able to strike at Pakistan in a blitzkrieg type of fashion without giving us the advance warning of getting our strategic nuclear weapons ready. That is why, to counter that strategy, Pakistan has developed tactical nuclear weapons to act as a deterrence against the cold start strategy and not to start a war.
Okay. Another question I want to ask you, Mr. Ali, is that about Pakistan's strategic importance, particularly when it comes to fight against terrorism. Now, your Prime Minister, as some international media reports have suggested, have been linking terrorism or the fight against terrorism with what's going on between India and Pakistan and other countries' attitude toward it. Now, would you explain exactly what Pakistan means?
Well, Pakistan, you see, has suffered tremendously in the last, I would say, about 12 years or so, because the terror attacks on Pakistan started after 2007. And since then, the armed forces of Pakistan, the people of Pakistan, they have suffered tremendously. We have lost something like 70,000 very precious lives. Every life is precious. And besides that, we have also lost tremendously as far as revenues are concerned. Revenues which were coming due to tourism, revenues that were coming because of trade, because of sports, all that has been on a hold. But Pakistan has fought back against terror and conducted some very important military operations, and we feel that we are on the brink of defeating terrorism. Once that happens, then we will be able to open up for trade and for tourism, and we are not interested in war, because war is no solution to any problem.
Okay, Mr. Ren, you've been attentively listening to your two colleagues coming from India and Pakistan. Now, of course, this is more a bilateral issue. However, with the security of the region in mind, it is also an issue concerning everybody, China included. Mr. Ren, what do you make of the latest debate at the United Nations, first of all, about the India and Pakistan conflict regarding Kashmir, and also China's attitude so far?
Well, of course, there are closed-door consultation at the UN Security Council is the first in over 50 years.
But we haven't seen any result coming out of it.
No, of course it's not able to reach anything as we expected. The question or the problem now having is that exactly the concern or the kind of a scenario where international community, including China, is very much concerned that this region, the issue, the dispute of Kashmir is a kind of flashpoint that over the past 70 years and more has caused 4 wars between India and Pakistan. And ever since the explosion or nuclear testing in 1998, the exchange, the confrontation has a nuclear sort of dimension. And even though, as the two our colleagues have talked about, they all seems to want to say that they are very much cautious about how to use the nuclear powers, and they are all thinking of deterrence, and it is really a kind of a concern, and that it may, if there are any miscalculations, if there are any problem without that, then it will be a big disaster.
Right.
And of course, India's the defense minister statement is also very much concerned, even though I think my colleagues are talking about there are some sort of caveats to that, but it was.
What about the terrorism issue?
Terrorism issue is exactly, I think, the issue that both India and Pakistan should focus on. But because of this new development, it seems that the conversation or any possible collaboration now is being that deviation to that. And I would add one more dimension, that is the regional security and stability. We have recently, in the past 3 days, 3 explosions in Afghanistan, and we know there are the burning issues in Middle East. So this region has enough troubles, and we don't want to have any trouble at all, let alone a possible nuclear sort of conflict.
I see. Obviously, nobody wants to see further escalation of the tensions, I guess, either from India and Pakistan. But the question is really what to do from both sides and what they are willing to do from both sides. Let me, before we wrap up today's discussion, go to you first, Mr. Bhaskar from India, about what do you think India can do to win more trust from the Indian international community to lessen the concerns of the international community. And really, if you say the purpose is not necessarily to be hostile, what can you do to let the other side know that really the purpose is not about being hostile? Mr. Bhaskar, please.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, I'd like to make this point again very unambiguously, that from the Indian side, there is no kind of suggestion that there is any nuclear dimension to what is happening now. Yes, the Pakistani Prime Minister has made a statement which, as I said, may have its own logic, but from the Indian perspective, there is absolutely no question of any nuclear dimension. Okay. And what India can do, ma'am, if I may add, just to add to what the Air Marshal from Pakistan had said about the issue of terrorism. Now, the global community is aware, and so is Beijing and your Foreign Office, that today there is a Financial Action Task Force, which is a global body. It has arrived at a conclusion that Pakistan is providing certain support to terrorism, terror groups. India has consistently said, if Pakistan stops supporting terror or aiding these groups, it would create the environment for us to have a dialogue on every issue that Pakistan would like to discuss.
To be fair, you also have 30 seconds, so let me go to you, Mr. Hali, in Pakistan. 30 seconds, please, sir.
Yes. For the future, you see, there is a possible solution only if the two sides talk. But if India continues to refuse to talk and places the caveat that unless Pakistan stops supporting terrorism. Now, you see, both India and Pakistan are victims of terrorism, and unless we talk to each other about how to tackle terrorism, which happens to be conducted by non-state actors, and I don't believe for a moment that any Pakistani has been responsible, on its own or with the state backing in conducting terrorism in India. So let us talk to each other, and I believe we can find a solution.
We are running out of time. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, the three of you, for joining us for this discussion. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time. Bye for now.